What's going on, everybody? In this video, we're going to be watching Jordan Peterson, some of his most savage moments, his best comebacks when he used to do more of these types of interviews. So I'm not going to beat around the bush here. Sit back. It's going to be a bit of a longer video. Grab a water, a juice, a beer, a glass of wine, whatever floats your boat. For my radical leftist followers, if there's any of you out there, get your glass of warm milk. Find your safe space. And before we get into it, to all my regulars who are always commenting and leaving a thumbs up, I appreciate all of you. Let's get into the clips.
You said that the problem with those angry women is that since at the end of the argument you cannot fight physically, you can't really deal with them.
That's not what I said. I said that that's one of the things that keeps conversation between men civil. Women can't argue with angry women. Women are often bullied by angry women.
What I meant was more, you said that, and I'm really like not trying to paraphrase you or, you know, to put words into your mouth.
You are trying that directly.
No, it is things that you said, that you cannot deal with those
yes, but don't tell me
crazy
that you're not trying to put words into my mouth, because you've selected what you're going to ask, and you selected it very carefully, with a tremendous amount of forethought. Well, there's a purpose for that. What is the purpose precisely?
I am quoting things that you said.
Why? What is it that you're trying to establish?
Because you said that.
I thought we were talking about masculinity.
We are.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
How are we talking about masculinity?
Because I'm asking you what you think of men and of women.
Basically what you've been trying to do, I would say for the last 15 minutes, is put me into a sequence of corners by accusing me of various forms of misbehavior. So why are we doing that? What's the point here?
These are things that you said. My job as a journalist is to ask questions about what you represent and the ideas that you defend.
Your job is also to select the things that you might ask about in some manner that doesn't indicate a substantive bias. You picked 3 things to talk to me about in the last 20 minutes that were very carefully selected. Like, why did you pick those things?
Because this is my job.
No, not necessarily. You could be asking me, for example, why I've spoken to 250,000 people live in the last 8 months. That might be more newsworthy.
Well, we're not going to have a big debate about journalism, but if a journalist doesn't ask the tough questions, how can you give the good answers?
Well, it depends on what the tough questions are. It depends on
I didn't think that they would be tough. We're talking about things that you said. I mean, if it's easier to have conversation between men, because there is this underlying threat, you know, of a physical contact.
I don't think it's easier. It tends to be somewhat more civil.
This is the question, the heart of the matter. So on the one hand, you say, look, you don't have a clue what you're doing, stay out of it, right? But we live in democratic systems where it's our responsibility not to stay out of it. So how do you manage that? Because you seem to be saying...
With humility.
Humility, right. But humility doesn't preclude activism.
Generally it does, yes.
Why?
But that doesn't mean that I'm saying that there is no situations under which political action or activism is justified, because there are clearly situations under which it's justified. But it's not the first thing that you should be taught how to do when you're an 18-year-old person going to university and you don't know a damn thing.
So I don't doubt that there's callow youth. I don't doubt that people have a lot to learn. And
they're not learning it from their professors either.
That may be true. That may be true. But you're clearly, I mean, a big part of your narrative comes from that energy of resisting that kind of, you know...
Circumventing it.
Circumventing, but you're also saying, you know, these people who complain about the world, they should just focus on their own, what they can control themselves and work within that space.
To begin with.
To begin with, but equally, there is a slight derision in the tone about people who actually care about bigger than self issues.
It's not slight.
Okay, it's big then. So, bigger than self problems, which arguably...
They don't care about them. They just act like they're just acting out the delusion that they care about them generally.
You seem to be caught up.
I watch the activists at the universities.
Right.
I know what they're like.
And we've seen the videos, and we know that kind of confrontation.
Yes.
And I don't
We've seen Wilfrid Laurier, for example.
I've seen many, but I don't doubt that there are those who are like that. But there are many millions more, and I mentioned Gandhi, but you know, arguably...
You can't use him as an example.
Okay, well, Buddha, for example.
Or
Buddha left his wife and child.
Yeah, but you can't use them as examples.
Okay,
first of all, like Buddha's like Christ. It's like, well, there's Christ. It's, yeah. What do you mean? There's Christ in university activists?
No, but there's...
Like,
well, there's... so Martin Luther King, can I use him?
Yeah.
Right? So Martin Luther King had an affair. It was quite well known. You know, his personal life was a bit complex.
Yeah.
But you wouldn't say that, you know, he had to sort that out before he went to sort of try and deal with civil rights in the US. So I'm trying to get at the core of the tension.
No, I would say that his own personal faults didn't preclude his social responsibility. Right. And it really is important to get that straight. But I would say that his own personal faults served as a detriment to his overall mission.
Right.
And then I'm not, believe me, I am not saying that if I was in Martin Luther King's position, I would have done a better job. It's like, I am not saying that, man, not in the least. In the workplace, let's say, both ways, but you're playing with fire. And you need to know what the rules are. We don't know what the rules are.
Okay, how about what if I said it is okay to flirt with your coworker from time to time, but don't grab them in the privates?
Well, that seems, I think we could agree that might be a reasonable start, right? But then, of course, you still have the problem of exactly what constitutes acceptable flirting.
Do you feel like the majority of people then who are sort of in this Me Too movement right now who have been speaking out,
yeah.
I mean, do you really think all of them are saying that you can't flirt at all? Or do you think most of them are saying, you just don't grab me in the privates? Because I just, as somebody who also has read about this, who's studied it quite a bit, who has followed it very intensely, it really does seem like the message is like, hey, don't pull your robe off, don't grab me in the boobs.
No, I think it's worse than that.
You do?
Yeah, well, look at what happened with NBC. Now you're supposed to report your coworkers if you suspect them of romantic entanglements.
That's been true about American, that is one symptom.
But this is a policy now.
It is. It's a policy at one company about sort of this industry-wide problem.
Yeah, it's a response to it, but it's a bad response. You said, is it only about not being grabbed? It's like, no, it's not only about that.
If it was only about not being grabbed, would you be okay with it?
Well, I'm not in favor of people being involuntarily grabbed. I'm not in favor of sexual harassment or sexual assault, and not in the least. I already told you what I think. I'm a sexual conservative.
Sure.
I don't think people should have sex on the first date. I think they should be very careful with sex, right? So I'm not in the camp of let's grab each other under the mistletoe at the Christmas party, because what the hell? I'm not in that camp. I'm in the be bloody careful camp.
I'm confused about how this dovetails with your thesis that the left is too preoccupied with being non-confrontational. Right?
The left is too preoccupied
just that
with
we are.
That's interesting.
Okay, all right.
No, that's a good
paraphrasing,
question.
But the idea that liberals, especially intellectuals, are preoccupied with politically correct speech, that they're not.
I see.
And yet.
No, they're too preoccupied with identity politics by a large margin, and they tend to categorize everyone by their ethnicity and their sex and their gender, and I think all that does is turn people into tribal actors, and that the end result of that is catastrophe.
Jordan Peterson looked really unimpressed with what that lady was trying to feed him, didn't he? Guys, if you like this type of content, if you're not already subscribed, if you haven't left a thumbs up on the video, I'm not asking you to subscribe. We all get lots of notifications, but a thumbs up really goes a long way into helping your boy out. Let's get back to the video.
As a clinical psychologist, I've often treated people with anxiety, and people wonder, practically, individually, clinically, why are people anxious? And I think, that's a completely ridiculous question. The reasons for anxiety are starkly self-evident. What I wonder is, why aren't people terrified out of their skulls so badly every second of their life that they can't even move? Yeah, and you all laugh because you understand that. It's like anxiety, that's no mystery. It's like brief spells of calm, that's a mystery. Okay, and a client will come to me and say, well, I'm procrastinating. Why do I procrastinate? It's like, no, that's a stupid question. It's easy just to sit there and do nothing. What's the mystery is why you ever get up and do anything difficult at all. Procrastination is the default. And psychologists ask, doctors ask, well, why do people take cocaine? It's like, no, it's the wrong question. The right question is, why not, like an addicted rat, don't you just take cocaine all the time until you die? That's the question. And this question about meaning is like that too. Is there meaning in life? That's a stupid question. And I'm serious about that. That's not a question you ever ask yourself if you're in pain, right? Because when you're in pain, you know that life has a meaning. It's the pain. And you can't argue yourself out of that meaning. And so, when we're asking whether or not life has meaning, that isn't what we mean. What we mean is, in the face of life's pain and suffering, does life have any positive?
Woman is a real woman.
I don't really like the way those questions are formulated. You know, I don't know what that means. What do you mean a real woman?
Well, I'm asking you, in your mind, you know, it depends what you think a real woman is, but do you think a trans woman is a woman?
No.
Why not?
Because I think that women are capable, generally speaking, of having babies, and they have female genitalia, and they have an XX chromosome, and I think the biological markers are relevant. It doesn't necessarily mean that I don't think that people should be treated with respect and dignity if they happen not to fit easily into a gender category. That's a different issue.
Right.
But it's a matter of definition, and I actually think it's a foolish argument in some sense, because what do you mean by real?
Well, I mean, you've just clarified that, though. You don't think that a trans woman is a woman. And do you think that that is what is behind or explains your opposition to this idea of a law mandating you to use a preferred pronoun, is because you don't actually believe that that's the truth, that a trans woman is a woman and therefore you can't use that pronoun?
No, that's not my argument at all.
Really?
Yeah, really. My argument is that the government shouldn't compel voluntary speech.
No, but I know what your argument is, and
no,
you've
but
made
that's
it very
really
clearly.
it. No, but that's exactly it. There's
but the
no behind.
motivation
There's
behind
no motivation behind it.
But you don't believe
I wouldn't
a
have
trans
put
woman is a woman.
everything on my online in my life to take the stance I did unless I had thought that through very deeply. And I've thought it through very deeply. There aren't hidden motivations that have to do with some arbitrary prejudice against trans people.
Okay.
It's pure and simply this. There's never been a time in English common law history where the government compelled speech, and the Canadian government dared to do that. And that was unacceptable. And they masked it with this show of compassion for the oppressed, and I don't buy it. Marxists say, well, that wasn't real Marxism. What it really means, and I've thought about this for a long time, it's the most arrogant possible statement anyone could ever make. It means, if I would have been in Stalin's position, I would have ushered in the damn utopia instead of the genocidal massacres, because I understand the doctrine of Marxism and everything about me is good. It's like, well, think again, sunshine. You don't understand it. You don't understand it. And you're not that good. And if the power was in your hands, assuming you had the competence, which you don't, you wouldn't have done any better. And even if you had, there would have been someone else waiting right behind you to shoot you the first time you actually tried to do anything good. And that's what happened to all the old guard who ran the damn revolution. Stalin rounded them all up and shot them, along with their families and millions of other people. So even if you do happen to be an avatar of moral purity that you claim implicitly, the probability that you'd get to act out your goodness in relationship to those possessed by your ideology is zero.
Those are the sorts of problems that trans people face every day, being out of housing, being considered, considering suicide. These are really big problems.
My refusal to use pronouns because left-wing activists want me to use them has nothing to do with whether or not trans people are having difficulties in society. And I'd also like to point out that I've had many letters of support.
Problem, isn't it?
I've had many letters of support from trans people, and they tell me that the trans activists don't support them, and most trans people
Jordan,
actually wanted to be referred to as he or she.
Doesn't mean
they
that
weren't
you
my
are
friends.
Untransphobic.
They
just
weren't
because
my
you
friends.
know a few people, just because you've talked to a few trans people, you don't know the trans community like the trans community does. You've got no idea what it's like to be trans.
Professor Pete, Professor Pete, I'm sorry to interrupt. Let's let Professor Peterson finish his thought, please.
All right. So, the trans activists aren't proper representatives of the trans community because they haven't been elected by the trans community.
Nobody elected
they're noisy.
You either, Jordan.
I'm not speaking for anyone except myself, and on behalf of other people, perhaps who want to maintain the right to free speech. I'm not claiming that I'm a representative of white people or white men or any other group. I'm speaking on behalf of myself, and so I'm not taking.
But Professor Peterson, let me jump in there, though, because we have seen an evolution of language. There are words that we don't use anymore.
Not by legislation.
Well, legislation or not, there are words that have evolved. We don't use, for example, I'm Asian. I would bristle if someone called me Oriental. That is an evolution of how we use words. How is this different, whether legislated or not?
I understand
I understand legislatively, but if at the heart of it is to allow a student to study free of what they feel is discrimination, why not help that along?
I already made my case for why not help that along. I believe that this legislation is extraordinarily dangerous, and there's other elements of it too that we haven't even got to in our society yet, like the protection for gender expression. And I've looked at gender expression in the Ontario Human Rights Code, and as far as I can tell, gender expression is best summarized in a single word: fashion.
You know, it's too bad that he doesn't do these interviews anymore. People are always trying to bait him into saying something just so they can have a quick snippet or a little bit of a clickbait thumbnail. Always trying to corner him, press him on stuff, put words in his mouth. I think he just got tired of it, to be honest with you. He's a multi-millionaire now. He doesn't need to do this. He's got his own platform, his own podcast. He does his speaking events. And he can pick and choose the conversations that he wants to have with people that are probably more on his level of intellect. If you've not watched his shows on the Daily Wire platform, I suggest you find a way to see them because they are tremendous. Let's get back to it.
When people talk about common ground, it's got to be founded on some kind of truth. And when we have feminists saying, I don't believe in the biological differences between men and women, well, that's why it's controversial. Where do you go from there? That's why it's controversial to say what you're saying, and it's controversial to say, hold on a second, maybe a girl on testosterone therapy winning high school wrestling meets is a problem. That's controversial.
Yeah, maybe that's a bad idea. It's just possible that that's not a very good idea. You know, I mean, it's hard to imagine that could be the case. But, well, in this idea that I don't believe in the biological differences between men and women, it's like, well, what do you mean by believe? Exactly. It's like you act out your belief. You know, I mean, what the hell does that mean? And what do you mean? See, what do you mean by belief? What do you mean by biology? And what do you mean by gender? Like, as soon as you put those three concepts together in a sentence that says, I don't believe in the biological difference between the genders, you throw the meaning of all three of those words up into the air so far that no one can tell what you're talking about, including you.
Yeah. And that's the goal, though, I think, a lot of the time. I think it's pretty...
Oh, definitely. Definitely. The goal, part of the goal is an all-out assault on the categorical structure.
Of Women's Affairs in New Zealand, and the Minister of Women's Affairs, or the Minister for Women as she's known, suggested recently that there were too many white old men on boards in New Zealand of private and public companies, and just suggested that they needed to move aside so there could be more diversity. Your response to that suggestion?
Well, what's her racial and ethnic background, just out of curiosity?
I think she's born in America, Julianne Genter. She's a member of our Green Party here.
Is she white?
Yes.
Well, maybe it's time for her to bloody well move aside and let someone who isn't white have her position. That's pure narcissism at work, by the way. You know, to hijack an event like this that other people put time and effort into, and to use their civility of the crowd and the civility of the organizers as an excuse to blatantly yell out your ill-informed opinions is no way to conduct a civil dialogue. It's absolutely appalling. The people who do that should be embarrassed. I mean, and I've spoken with no shortage of trans people, and, you know, my proclivity has been, without exception so far, to address them in the manner that seems most socially appropriate under the circumstances. Now, you asked a specific question, which was, do I have special expertise that I might share with other people?
You're doing Martin Luther, and I think that these issues are a little subtler than those. And so,
well, what makes you think that you're doing the kids that are grandstanding any favors by going along with their manipulation?
Because I can't decide which ones those are. Well, I just have my gut instincts, and that's not good enough.
Look, fair enough, but you have a type 1 and type 2 error problem. So one error is that you don't call students what they deserve to be called. That's one error. And the other error is that you call students what they want to be called even though they don't deserve it. And so what you're trying to do optimally is to minimize both those errors. And to do that, you have to take a middle route. Now, what you've decided to do, and I'm not criticizing it, is you've decided to allow for the possibility 100% of one of those errors because you think it's a less significant error. And, you know, you might be right. But it's not like you're acting in an error-free manner. You've just decided to minimize one form of error at the expense of the other. Because I would say you're allowing, what would you call it, attention-seeking and somewhat narcissistic undergraduates to gain the upper hand over you in your class.
Question for Professor Peterson. Why do you feel that someone's personal gender identity and pronouns infringes your free speech? Can one not also argue, based on your interpretation, that professors can use racial slurs in their classroom and that the inability to do so would violate their freedom of speech?
There's a difference between saying that there's something you can't say and saying that there are things that you have to say. And I regard these made-up pronouns, all of them, as the neologisms of radical PC authoritarians. Do you understand that? And I'm not a fan of that sort of person. And the reason I'm not a fan of that sort of person is because I've done my homework. I've read everything I can get my hands on in the development of authoritarian political systems, and I know the literature inside out and backwards. And I am not going to be a mouthpiece for language that I detest. And that's that.
This is such an old snippet because I remember where I was living at the time that this interview dropped on TVO in Ontario. I was still living in Canada. Jordan Peterson was still teaching at the university. And it's so crazy to me to think that if the Liberal government in Canada didn't poke this man so much, they didn't poke the bear, so to speak, he might still be in his classroom posting his lectures. Imagine how lucky these students were to have this man as their teacher. And this is how I Jordan Peterson. I used to listen to his classroom teachings. They're still online, I'm sure, on his YouTube page. If you went to the oldest videos, I'm sure you can still find them. And they're excellent. Absolutely excellent. And it's funny to me that these clips that we're watching right now have stood the test of time. Everything that this man predicted pretty much has come through. People were calling him crazy. You're going off about the pronoun stuff. Don't worry, there'll be no laws about that. And look where we are today. More divided than ever, playing identity politics. Jordan Peterson hit the nail on the head years ago. Let's get back.
As you might imagine, you've been a topic of conversation on this campus a lot in the past week or so, certainly among a lot of us who discuss politics. And one of the things that sort of united people who like and dislike a lot of your ideas is that we appreciate your defense of free speech, and we appreciate you coming here to talk about it with us. But one of the things I thought was really interesting is Professor Van Dyke addressed the distinction between you and Jonathan Haidt. And you mentioned this as sort of a temperamental one. And I think, I'm sure that's true to some extent, but I noticed you've made a lot of more sort of substantively inflammatory claims. Like in the course of this lecture, you called the authors of Facebook posts demons and totalitarians. In past events, you've called them things like neo-Marxists, cultural Marxists. You've called them, I believe, a fifth column that is committing treason against the West. And it seems to me this is more than temperamental. This is a substantive difference. And
it's a substantive difference,
yes. And another thing you've done is that, unlike Haidt, you have a more sort of comprehensive political program. You've talked a lot in defense of traditional hierarchies, both of gender, of class, so on, though emphatically not of race. And so it seems that
I haven't talked about defense of traditional hierarchies in terms of gender and class. That's not true.
Well, you've talked about hierarchies in society. You've talked
about that's
yes.
true. I have done that, but I haven't justified them on the basis of gender and class. You whatever it
well,
okay,
categories. You talk
not
about,
okay. That's an important distinction.
Okay, but you defend hierarchies in society in a way that you talk a lot about the Pareto distribution. Yes.
That doesn't mean I defend it.
Well, okay.
Okay.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think you talk
Observing that something exists is not the same as defending it. How in the world?
Well, people attack it, right?
What's that?
And you don't. People attack it.
Attack
inherently attack the hierarchies of society as inherently unjust, right?
Well, they're unjust, but they're also useful.
Okay, so you say they're useful. Some
people
would disagree
look at
with
it
that
this
proposition.
way. Okay, look at it this way. You obviously think that it's worthwhile to stand up and ask a question.
Yes.
So you think that standing up and asking a question is better than not standing up and asking a question.
Yes.
Okay, that's a hierarchy.
Yes.
Of values.
Yes.
Okay, without the hierarchy of values, you couldn't act.
Of course.
No, not of course.
Well, wait.
It's partly why I'm defending the hierarchy. Without a hierarchy,
there's
no impetus to
act.
act.
Hierarchy, right?
What's that?
There is a hierarchy in society, right?
No, there's multiple hierarchies in society.
There are multiple hierarchies in society, right?
Yes.
And you say that they are based in, you invoke the lobster, right? That they are based in nature.
I said that they were inevitable.
Yes,
Yes,
that they were inevitable. Some
right.
people
That
disagree
doesn't
with
mean
that.
that they're good.
But my point is that this is generally relevant to it. You have a broader point than free speech. This is one of the things you talk about. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Whereas I think there are some other activists who focus on more exclusively.
I'm not
on
an
free
activist.
Speech.
Need a question.
Yes. Okay.
I mean,
My
like
question
I
is
said,
this.
you're doing fine, but
think,
it's just too much. Like I can't keep it
do
straight.
you think that your behavior risks politicizing it, and do you think that politicization is justified?
I think my behavior risks politicizing it, yes. I would rather it not be politicized. And I'm doing what I can to manage that risk. However, it's become political in my country because the government implemented compelled speech legislation. So I wasn't complaining about that before it became political. Now, and there is a time, even when you're detached in some sense from the political realm, that you can't be detached anymore. Well, I'm not happy with the fact that this has become politicized. You could say that I haven't done a stellar job in ensuring in every possible manner that this has remained neutrally apolitical. Probably true, but I'm not particularly unhappy with the way things have gone so far. And I'm not happy with the radical left. And so if they're irritated at me, so much the better, as far as I'm concerned. So have I conducted myself perfectly? It's like, undoubtedly no. So I've got more than my fair share of faults, and a temper is one of them. But I'm muddled.
Well, it's not an essentially bad idea.
It's a terrible
to challenge
idea.
The tyranny of the patriarchy and the West.
It is an absolutely terrible idea when you assume that the fundamental reality of the West is patriarchal tyranny. It's like, compared to what exactly? Our societies are more free and more productive than any other societies in the world and than any other societies that have ever existed. Now, that doesn't mean they're without their faults.
No, but if you look and you say, look at the facts, and you look at who's in power...
And who is in power exactly? And what exactly do you mean by that? Let's say men.
Political power. Mainly men.
It depends on the domain. It's certainly not the case in anything that has to do with the provision of health. It's not the case in education.
No, but say political power.
At the very upper echelons.
Trump. Yes,
at the very upper echelons,
yeah.
Politics are dominated by men. What's the point? Does that make it a patriarchal tyranny?
Well, it certainly makes it patriarchal to a certain extent.
Well, and so when women participate in that patriarchal process, is that also a patriarchy? So when we have a healthcare system that's dominated by women, as we do now, is that a patriarchy?
No.
Why not?
I wouldn't call it a patriarchy.
Because it doesn't involve men.
Yeah.
Isn't it the structure that's patriarchal, or is it the gender that makes the difference?
Clearly you think it's the structure?
No, I don't buy the whole patriarchy idea or the tyranny idea. I think it's absolutely appalling. The idea that we have a hierarchical structure in the West is true. The idea that hierarchies tend towards corruption and deception and stultification across time is true. It's certainly the case that we need to be awake and criticize our institutions, but that is not the same thing as calling the West a patriarchal tyranny. And words matter. All right, guys, that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed these clips. If you're still here at this point, consider subscribing to my channel, help it grow, and I will catch you all in the next video. Peace out, everybody.